Tonight, I wasn't just attending this wedding. I was orchestrating its destruction. A wedding, her daughter's wedding, to be precise. A $100,000 spectacle paid for by yours truly. Every last detail meticulously designed, every flower, every glimmering chandelier, every ounce of champagne, all a piece of my revenge. I glanced at my reflection and smirked. Confidence radiated from me, as it always had. The last few years had been a game of patience, strategy, and restraint. It had taken everything in me to bide my time, to pretend I was just another clueless, discarded husband. But I wasn't clueless, and I sure as hell wasn't discarded. Angela, my wife, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-wife, thought she had one. Thought she had pulled the wool over my eyes, spun her web of lies and deceit so intricately that I'd remain blind forever. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the conveniently placed business trips. She thought I was an idiot, and for a time, I let her believe that. Angela was a cruel woman. Beautiful, sure, but rotten to the core. She was the type of person who could smile in your face and stab you in the back without missing a beat. A liar, a manipulator, a woman who had convinced herself she was untouchable. She had spent years disrespecting me, belittling me, treating me like an afterthought while she entertained her affairs in the shadows. But all shadows disappear under the right light. Tonight, at her daughter's wedding, her precious, spoiled daughter from her first marriage, Angela would watch her perfect world crumble. She would watch as the foundation she had so carefully built collapsed into dust. She would see the mask she wore so effortlessly slip from her face in front of everyone she held dear. The wedding was extravagant, exactly the way Angela liked things. Grand, excessive, meant to impress people she barely cared about. A pristine white tint stretched across the manicured lawn of the estate I had paid for, filled with shimmering crystal chandeliers and imported roses. Guests dressed in their finest attire sipped champagne and whispered about how beautiful the ceremony was, how lucky the bride was, how perfect the evening felt. It was all bullshit. I moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, shaking hands, smiling at people who had no idea what was coming. My patience had been tested for years, but tonight, it would pay off. Angela was in her element, laughing too loudly, flashing that fake smile, basking in the glow of being the mother of the bride. Her red gown hugged her curves, her jewelry sparkled under the chandeliers, and her eyes darted around, always watching, always assessing. But she never looked at me for long. Not really. Because deep down, she knew. She knew something was off. I had spent the last year setting the stage. The secret bank accounts, the quiet legal meetings, the subtle rewrites in our prenuptial agreement that she hadn't even bothered to read. The evidence gathered, the right people whispered to, the last-minute gifts arranged for this evening. Angela had thought she was playing the game, but she never realized I was the one writing the rules. She thought she had hidden everything. The affairs, the lies, the betrayal. But there's no such thing as secrets when the person you're deceiving is 10 steps ahead of you. The evening was winding down and soon, the real show would begin. I took a sip of my whiskey, savoring the burn as I locked eyes with Angela from across the room. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. Good. Because by the end of the night, uncertainty would be the least of her. Tonight, I wasn't just attending this wedding. I was orchestrating its destruction. A wedding, her daughter's wedding, to be precise. A $100,000 spectacle paid for by yours truly. Every last detail meticulously designed, every flower, every glimmering chandelier, every ounce of champagne. All a piece of my revenge. I glanced at my reflection and smirked. Confidence radiated from me, as it always had. The last few years had been a game of patience, strategy, and restraint. It had taken everything in me to bide my time, to pretend I was just another clueless, discarded husband. But I wasn't clueless, and I sure as hell wasn't discarded. Angela, my wife, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-wife, thought she had one. Thought she had pulled the wool over my eyes, spun her web of lies and deceit so intricately that I'd remain blind forever. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the conveniently placed business trips. She thought I was an idiot, And for a time, I let her believe that. Angela was a cruel woman. Beautiful, sure, but rotten to the core. She was the type of person who could smile in your face and stab you in the back without missing a beat. A liar, a manipulator, a woman who had convinced herself she was untouchable. She had spent years disrespecting me, belittling me, treating me like an afterthought while she entertained her affairs in the shadows. But all shadows disappear under the right light. Tonight, at her daughter's wedding, her precious, spoiled daughter from her first marriage, Angela would watch her perfect world crumble. She would watch as the foundation she had so carefully built collapsed into dust. She would see the mask she wore so effortlessly slip from her face in front of everyone she held dear. The wedding was extravagant, exactly the way Angela liked things. Grand, excessive, meant to impress people she barely cared about. A pristine white tint stretched across the manicured lawn of the estate I had paid for, filled with shimmering crystal chandeliers and imported roses. Guests dressed in their finest attire sipped champagne and whispered about how beautiful the ceremony was, how lucky the bride was, how perfect the evening felt. It was all bullshit. I moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, shaking hands, smiling at people who had no idea what was coming. My patience had been tested for years, but tonight, it would pay off. Angela was in her element, laughing too loudly, flashing that fake smile, basking in the glow of being the mother of the bride. Her red gown hugged her curves, her jewelry sparkled under the chandeliers, and her eyes darted around, always watching, always assessing. But she never looked at me for long. Not really. Because deep down, she knew. She knew something was off. I had spent the last year setting the stage. The secret bank accounts, the quiet legal meetings, the subtle rewrites in our prenuptial agreement that she hadn't even bothered to read. The evidence gathered, the right people whispered to, the last-minute gifts arranged for this evening. Angela had thought she was playing the game, but she never realized I was the one writing the rules. She thought she had hidden everything. The affairs, the lies, the betrayal. But there's no such thing as secrets when the person you're deceiving is 10 steps ahead of you. The evening was winding down and soon, the real show would begin. I took a sip of my whiskey, savoring the burn as I locked eyes with Angela from across the room. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. Good. Because by the end of the night, uncertainty would be the least of her worries. As the evening unfolded, I played my part flawlessly. The devoted husband, the gracious stepfather, the man who had poured a fortune into this wedding as a symbol of goodwill. Angela flitted from guest to guest, relishing the attention, the compliments, the admiration. But every time her eyes met mine, the unease grew. She was too proud to admit it, but I could see the doubt creeping into her perfectly made-up face. She knew me, or at least, she thought she did. She had spent years treating me like a fool, convincing herself that I was weak, naive, blind. But the truth? The truth was that I had simply been patient. I had waited, watched, collected every detail of her deception like a hunter stalking prey. And tonight, the trap would finally close. The band struck up a slow tune, and the bride and groom took to the dance floor, lost in their own world. The guests swayed along, smiling, oblivious. Even Angela, for a brief moment, let her guard down, caught up in the illusion of perfection. I checked my watch. It was almost time. The best man stood, tapping his champagne flute with a knife, preparing for the traditional toasts. Laughter rippled through the tent as the guests turned their attention toward him. Angela, ever the socialite, leaned forward in anticipation, eager to bask in the moment. She had no idea that the real toast of the evening wouldn't be his. Because in exactly 5 minutes, the first of my carefully laid surprises would arrive. And Angela's perfect world would never be the same again. The best man's speech was charming, filled with just the right amount of humor and sentimentality. The crowd laughed, wiped away a few tears, raised their glasses in honor of the bride and groom. A perfect moment. But perfect moments never last. As the applause faded, a waiter moved discreetly through the crowd, weaving between tables until he reached Angela. He leaned down, whispered something in her ear, and placed a small, elegantly wrapped box in front of her. Angela frowned. This wasn't planned. She glanced at me, but I merely lifted my whiskey in a silent toast, a slow smirk playing at my lips. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the ribbon before finally pulling it loose. The lid came off, and for a split second, confusion flickered across her face. Then, her entire body went rigid. Inside the box sat a simple black USB drive. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. Just a small, unassuming piece of plastic that held the power to burn her world to the ground. Her eyes snapped to mine, wide and panicked. I leaned back in my chair, taking another slow sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch between us. Around us, the guests continued their chatter, oblivious to the war now raging inside her mind. She knew. She didn't know exactly what was on that drive, but she knew it wasn't good. Angela swallowed hard, forcing a smile onto her lips, but I could see the cracks forming, the icy grip of fear tightening around her throat. I said nothing. I didn't need to, because the real nightmare was only just beginning. Angela's fingers trembled slightly as she closed the box, forcing a smile as though nothing had happened. But I saw the way she clenched her jaw, the way her breathing had changed, shallow, uneven. She was unraveling, and we were just getting started. She turned to me, her voice low, controlled. "What is this?" I swirled the whiskey in my glass, my smirk never wavering. "A wedding gift." Her nostrils flared. "Now isn't the time." "Oh, I disagree," I said, leaning in just enough that only she could hear me. "I think it's the perfect time." Her mask nearly slipped then. I saw the brief flash of pure panic in her eyes before she forced it down, reminding herself that she was Angela, the woman who always had control, who always manipulated every situation to her advantage. She wouldn't open it here. She wouldn't risk it. Good. That was exactly what I wanted. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, his voice booming over the speakers, "it's time for the mother of the bride to say a few words." Angela's head jerked toward the microphone, her eyes still darting back to me. She was trapped, and she knew it. The only thing she could do now was push forward, pretend everything was fine. She stood, smoothing out her dress, schooling her expression back into that picture-perfect charm she wore so well. But I knew better. She was terrified, and I wasn't done with her yet. Angela's heels clicked against the polished floor as she strode toward the microphone, her shoulders squared, her posture perfect. To anyone else, she looked poised, elegant, the ever-composed mother of the bride. But I saw the slight stiffness in her movements, the way she gripped the microphone just a little too tightly, the way her eyes flicked toward me for just a second before she plastered on that fake, dazzling smile. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth, practiced. "It means the world to my daughter and our family to have you here on such a special day." Our family. I nearly laughed. Angela continued, weaving a speech filled with carefully chosen words, talking about love, devotion, the importance of trust. Oh, the irony. She was good. I'd give her that. Even with the weight of that little black USB sitting in front of her, she held her composure. But I could see the edges fraying. The way she blinked a little too much. The way she glanced at the gift table, where that small, seemingly harmless box sat waiting. I let her have her moment. Let her think she still had control. Then, just as she was about to finish her speech, I stood. The movement caught her attention instantly. Our eyes locked, and I raised my glass, interrupting the moment with a slow, deliberate, a toast. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as all eyes turned to me. Angela hesitated, gripping the microphone, her knuckles white. "Darling, now isn't really?" "Oh, but it is," I said smoothly, stepping forward. "Tonight is a night for truth, for celebration, for reflection. And what better way to do that than with a toast?" Angela's mask faltered, just for a second. She knew. The walls were closing in, and she was running out of exits. A hush fell over the room as I took my place beside Angela, glass in hand. The guests, expecting another heartfelt speech, turned their full attention to me. The bride and groom watched curiously. The bride, Angela's precious daughter, beaming, unaware of the storm about to crash into her perfect night. Angela's fingers twitched at her side. Darling, I raised a hand, silencing her with nothing more than a cool glance. Let's not interrupt, dear. After all, this is an important moment. She knew she couldn't stop me, not without making a scene. And Angela despised public humiliation more than anything. I turned to the crowd, my voice steady, confident. I want to take a moment to acknowledge something truly beautiful tonight, something that defines what love, commitment, and honesty truly mean. I let the words hang, my gaze flicking to Angela for just a second, watching her throat bob as she swallowed hard. I have had the great honor of being part of this family, I continued, my voice smooth. I've supported, cared for, and loved the people in this room deeply, and in return, I've been blessed with clarity. Angela's nails dug into her palm. She was barely breathing now. I turned toward her, lifting my glass in her direction. So, my love, a toast to you. Her lips parted slightly, her entire body tense. To your incredible ability to deceive, to manipulate, to lie so effortlessly for years. To the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the secret rendezvous. To your audacity to stand here, preaching about love and trust, while you've done everything in your power to destroy them. A stunned silence crashed over the room. A few gasps. A clink of a fork dropping against a plate. The bride furrowed her brows, glancing between her mother and me, confusion dawning. Angela's breath hitched. You're making a scene. I took a slow sip of my drink, savoring the moment. Oh, sweetheart. The scene hasn't even started yet. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a small remote. With a single press of a button, the massive projector screen behind us flickered to life. Angela turned, eyes widening in horror as the first image appeared. And just like that, her perfect world shattered. The room held its collective breath as the projector hummed to life, casting a harsh, unrelenting light onto the massive screen behind us. Angela stood frozen, her face drained of color, her fingers gripping the microphone stand like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And then the first image appeared. A grainy but unmistakable photo. Angela in a hotel room, wrapped in nothing but a silk robe, a smirk on her lips as she leaned over a man who was most definitely not me. The timestamp in the corner left no room for doubt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Angela's daughter, her precious, adored daughter, stiffened in her chair, her smile vanishing as she processed what she was seeing. The groom looked at her, then at me, realization dawning in his eyes. Angela made a sound, a strangled mix between a gasp and a plea. "Turn that off." I ignored her. The next image appeared. Screenshots of texts, dozens of them, scrolling across the screen like the credits of a movie. "I can't wait to see you tonight. He suspects nothing. God, I wish I was yours instead." Then, the final blow, video footage. Security camera footage from the very hotel Angela had been so sure was discreet. A clear shot of her entering a room, her lover's arms wrapping around her, the door clicking shut behind them. The crowd erupted into whispers, scattered murmurs of disbelief and judgment. The bride's face crumpled, her hands trembling as she stared at her mother. Angela turned to me, her voice low, desperate. "You bastard." I smiled. "No, darling. You are the liar. You are the cheater. And now everyone knows." She reached for the microphone, but I was faster. I plucked it from its stand and addressed the crowd. "I paid for this wedding," I said, my voice carrying through the tent, every last cent, because I wanted my wife to have everything she wanted. And in return, she gave me this. Lies, betrayal, years of deceit. Angela lunged toward me, but I sidestepped her effortlessly. "Enjoy the rest of the night," I said, turning to the bride, my voice softening just slightly. "I'm truly sorry you had to find out this way. But your mother? She deserves this." And with that, I set the microphone down, adjusted my cufflinks, and walked away, leaving Angela to drown in the wreckage of her own making. I walked away slowly, savoring the weight of every step as I left Angela standing there, exposed before the very people she had spent years impressing. The silence didn't last long. Whispers turned into full-blown murmurs. The guests, her friends, her family, her colleagues, leaned toward each other, some pretending to be horrified, others openly gawking, drinking in the scandal like expensive champagne. Angela's daughter was the first to react. "Mom." Her voice wavered, thick with shock and disbelief. Angela spun to her, her face contorted in something between rage and desperation. "Sweetheart, it's not what it looks like." But it was. The evidence had been damning, undeniable. A full, vivid display of her betrayal in high definition for the world to see. The groom stood, wrapping a protective arm around his new wife, his eyes sharp with disgust. "Are you serious? You've been lying to everyone this entire time?" Angela's lips parted, searching for words, any words that might save her. But there was nothing left to say. I settled into a chair at the bar, watching from a comfortable distance as the chaos unfolded. A waiter, clearly unsure of how to proceed, set a fresh glass of whiskey in front of me. I lifted it in thanks, then turned my attention back to my masterpiece. A few of Angela's so-called friends peeled away, whispering furiously as they left. Others stayed, too entertained to walk away just yet. And then, the ultimate betrayal. Angela's daughter, her face pale and filled with something close to hatred, grabbed her husband's hand and turned away. "I can't do this right now." "Wait." Angela reached for her, panic finally overtaking her cold, composed exterior. But her daughter yanked her arm away, shaking her head. "I need space." Angela stood there, her entire body trembling as she watched her daughter walk away from her, the foundation of her carefully crafted life crumbling beneath her feet. And I just took another sip of whiskey and smiled. Angela stood in the center of the disaster, shoulders shaking, hands clenched at her sides. For the first time in her life, she had no control. No words. No lies quick enough to patch the gaping wounds I had torn open. Her daughter, her pride, her legacy, had walked away. The guests, the very people Angela had spent years manipulating, no longer looked at her with admiration. Now, there was only judgment, whispers of disgrace. And me? I sat back, enjoying the view. Angela turned on her heel, storming toward me, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I swirled the whiskey in my glass, tilting my head slightly. "I think it's justice." She let out a bitter laugh, one laced with desperation. "You think you've won?" I placed my glass down and leaned in slightly, my voice calm, unwavering. "Oh, Angela, I didn't just win. I ended you." Her mask cracked then. The carefully constructed persona, the elegant, sophisticated socialite, crumbled before me, revealing the ugly, desperate woman beneath. "You destroyed our family," she seethed. "You humiliated me." I smirked. "No, darling. You destroyed it the moment you decided I wasn't enough. The moment you chose lies over loyalty." Her breathing was ragged now, her chest rising and falling quickly as she realized something far worse than public embarrassment. This was permanent. There was no salvaging her reputation, no coming back from this. I leaned back, adjusting my cufflinks, voice smooth as silk. "Oh, and Angela?" She didn't respond, just glared. Her eyes filled with a hatred she had once reserved only for people she thought were beneath her. I gave her a slow, knowing smile. "Check your bank account." Her eyes flickered with confusion for a split second before she grabbed her phone, her manicured fingers trembling as she tapped the screen. Then she froze. Her breath hitched. She looked at me, her face suddenly pale. "No." I lifted my glass once more, my smile widening. "Yes." Angela's face twisted in horror as she stared at her phone, her fingers trembling over the screen. The color drained from her skin, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Her bank account was empty. Every last cent, gone. I took another slow sip of my whiskey, savoring the moment. "Something wrong, dear?" Her head snapped up, pure panic flashing in her eyes. "What did you do?" Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and trembling. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my tone as calm as ever. "I simply corrected an oversight. You see, while you were so busy sneaking around, You failed to notice a few financial adjustments I made over the past year. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. That money was mine. I chuckled. No, Angela. That money was ours. But now? Now it's mine. Her jaw clenched, fury bubbling beneath her panic. You can't just take everything. Oh, but I can, I said smoothly. And I did. You never read the updated prenuptial agreement, did you? I watched realization crash over her like a tidal wave. She had been so arrogant, so sure of herself, that she hadn't even bothered to check the documents she signed months ago. She thought she had control, that I would always be there, her safety net, her fool. She was wrong. I continued, my voice casual, almost amused. You see, infidelity has consequences. And thanks to a few well-placed revisions, any assets tied to our marriage? Now legally mine. I took another sip of my drink. That includes the house, the cars, the accounts. Angela let out a strangled sound, her body shaking. No, this can't be happening. Oh, but it is. I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. And just so we're clear, this wedding, the one you paraded around like your grand gift to your daughter, paid for with my money. So congratulations, Angela. You just threw your last extravagant party on your way to complete ruin. She looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape, a solution, anything to reverse what was happening. But there was nothing left, nothing but her shame. And me, watching as she finally understood what it felt like to lose. Angela swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair, as if the weight of her downfall had finally settled onto her shoulders. Her breathing was uneven, her hands shaking. I had seen her angry before, furious, vengeful, manipulative. But this was different. This was fear. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You ruined me. I tilted my head slightly, feigning contemplation. No, Angela. You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it. She shook her head violently, her perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled, her makeup starting to smear under the heat of humiliation. You can't do this. You'll what? I cut in, my voice as cold as the ice in my glass. Run to one of your lovers for help? Cry to your friends? Oh, wait. I let the words hang for a moment before gesturing around the room. Angela followed my hand and finally noticed, really noticed, what was happening around her. People weren't whispering anymore. They were staring. Some watched in smug satisfaction, others in horror. But no one came to her aid. Not her friends, not her daughter, not even the man she had spent years betraying me for. She was utterly, devastatingly alone. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, to fight back, to deny it all. But no words came out, just silence. And I let it stretch. I stood, buttoning my jacket with practiced ease, my movements slow, deliberate. Then I leaned in just enough that only she could hear me. Tomorrow morning, I murmured, your things will be packed and waiting for you outside my house. You have nowhere left to go. No money, no reputation, nothing. Angela inhaled sharply, like a drowning woman trying to catch her breath. I straightened, adjusting my cufflinks. Enjoy the rest of the evening. And then I turned my back on her, just like she had done to me all those